It happens almost every single night without fail. Darkness falls quietly outside your bedroom window, signaling the final conclusion of a deeply exhausting day. Collapsing heavily onto the soft cushions of your sofa, your hand instinctively reaches for the television remote. Thousands of brilliant, critically acclaimed options immediately flood your glowing high-definition screen. Masterpieces of modern cinematic storytelling are sitting right there at your absolute fingertips. Gripping psychological thrillers promise to keep your tired mind entirely captivated until dawn. Massive, big-budget fantasy epics essentially beg for just a tiny fraction of your remaining attention. Yet, a strange, heavy reluctance suddenly washes over your chest like a cold wave. Hovering your thumb over the directional pad, making a simple choice feels impossibly, overwhelmingly difficult. Pressing play on an unseen, highly recommended masterpiece suddenly feels exactly like lifting a massive physical boulder. Instead of bravely exploring the unknown, a quiet, defeated sigh escapes your lips. Moving right past the heavily advertised new releases becomes an automatic, highly practiced nightly ritual. Personalized algorithms and buzzing trending pages are completely, effortlessly ignored by your scrolling thumb. Searching desperately for absolute safety, your eyes scan the digital library with a gentle, silent hunger. Eventually, you land securely on a title you have already watched from start to finish at least 15 times. Spotting that colorful, familiar logo instantly sends a profound wave of relief crashing through your fragile nervous system. Starting an episode where you already know every single line of dialogue is exactly like sinking into a perfectly drawn, warm bath. Every upcoming joke is anticipated, every romantic arc is securely known, and the peaceful resolution is absolutely guaranteed. Does this highly specific, oddly repetitive nighttime habit sound uncomfortably familiar to your own life? Perhaps you are the exact kind of person who constantly returns to the same fictional universe, ignoring a whole world of new media. If so, there is a very high probability you carry a quiet, lingering sense of guilt about this hidden preference. Friends passionately debate the shocking twists of the latest trending drama around the crowded dinner table. Coworkers enthusiastically discuss the newest true crime documentary while standing casually by the office water cooler. Meanwhile, a polite smile masks the secret knowledge that your entire weekend was spent rewatching a sitcom from a decade ago. Society often casually, sometimes cruelly, labels this specific behavior as incredibly boring or deeply uninspired. Cultural critics might even loudly call it a glaring lack of intellectual curiosity or a symptom of a stagnant, lazy mind. Sometimes, staring blankly at your glowing television, the dark thought might cross your mind that you are simply stuck permanently in the past. Why do you fiercely and stubbornly resist the simple, culturally accepted act of discovering fresh, exciting stories? What if the negative narrative you have internalized about this harmless habit is fundamentally, completely wrong? Consider the beautiful, liberating possibility that returning to familiar fictional worlds is absolutely not a tragic character flaw. It is certainly not a symptom of a deteriorating brain that refuses to logically learn new things. Repetitive viewing actually serves as a highly sophisticated, beautifully protective biological survival mechanism. To truly understand this invisible psychological phenomenon, we must first look closely at the heavy burden you carry every single day. Modern human existence operates basically as an exhausting, relentless marathon of terrifying unpredictability. From the exact moment a digital alarm clock violently pulls you from sleep, your central nervous system enters high alert. Navigating morning rush hour traffic requires intense spatial awareness and split-second survival calculations just to stay physically unharmed. Reading the subtle, constantly shifting emotional moods of an unpredictable boss drastically drains your internal empathy reserves. Casually checking a mobile phone accidentally exposes the delicate mind to a chaotic, overwhelming flood of negative global news. Random opinions from angry strangers and urgent text messages constantly fight a brutal war for your fractured attention span. Organic human minds are continually forced to rapidly process entirely novel, highly unexpected pieces of information without taking a break. Every single new piece of incoming sensory data requires a microscopic but very real expenditure of physical metabolic energy. By the time the sun finally sets and evening arrives, your internal biological battery is utterly, completely depleted. Decision-making centers located deep within your prefrontal cortex are literally crying out in the dark for a moment of genuine rest. Psychologists refer to this widespread, deeply exhausting modern condition as cognitive fatigue. Daily allowances of mental resources are quite literally running purely on empty fumes by 8 o'clock at night. Now, pause and try asking that overworked biological engine to suddenly start a brand new, complex television series. Starting a fresh, unseen story represents an incredibly demanding, highly complex neurological task for any human brain. Tired minds have to rapidly memorize new, confusing names while simultaneously decoding entirely unfamiliar faces. Mapping out complex, hidden social relationships between complete strangers requires active, sustained, and intense concentration. Figuring out the underlying, unspoken rules of a completely new fictional universe is basically heavy mental lifting. Evaluating whether a newly introduced character is fundamentally trustworthy or secretly dangerous happens continuously in the background. Human brains naturally view a pilot episode not as light entertainment, but as a complex puzzle that urgently needs solving. When violently drowning in the massive cognitive demands of navigating real life, asking for more processing power is simply asking too much. This specific biological bottleneck brings us directly to a fascinating, incredibly powerful psychological concept known formally as processing fluency. In simple, humane terms, processing fluency describes exactly how easily and smoothly our brains can digest incoming information. Biological hardware naturally and desperately loves things that are incredibly easy to process and effortlessly categorize. When information flows easily into tired minds, it automatically triggers a subtle, highly pleasant release of positive neurochemicals. Familiarity acts essentially as the ultimate, golden shortcut to achieving this deeply soothing state of cognitive ease. Choosing to press play on a movie watched a dozen times requires absolutely zero analytical effort from your prefrontal cortex. No mental calories are burned trying to frantically figure out unexpected plot twists or hidden character motives. Sudden jump scares, hidden threats, confusing timelines, and unfamiliar faces simply do not exist in this highly curated, safe space. Neural pathways associated with this beloved story have already been carved deeply into the physical structure of your mind. Information gracefully glides down these well-worn mental grooves, exactly like water flowing easily down a smooth, ancient riverbed. Minds finally get explicit permission to lay down heavy armor and rest deeply in the soft embrace of total predictability. However, this widespread cultural phenomenon goes much deeper than merely saving metabolic brain energy at the end of the day. Discussing the profound, deeply ingrained human need for absolute emotional safety is also incredibly important to this equation. Real life out there in the physical world is inherently, terrifyingly uncertain and beautifully, dangerously chaotic. A single, unexpected phone call on a random Tuesday afternoon can completely alter the entire trajectory of earthly existence. Long-term, seemingly stable relationships can suddenly fracture without any prior warning or logical explanation whatsoever. Physical health falters unexpectedly, reminding everyone daily of their own fragile, temporary, and highly vulnerable mortality. Financial security frequently acts as a shimmering, delicate illusion that can vanish into thin air entirely overnight. Very little absolute, concrete control exists over the terrifying real world located just outside your securely locked front door. Inside the four glowing, plastic borders of a television screen, however, the dynamic fundamentally changes completely. Total, absolute, almost godlike control over the emotional environment playing out before you is suddenly, magically achieved. Rewatching a beloved comedy series is actually a brilliant, subconscious psychological strategy for profound emotional regulation. Knowing the exact, specific second an incredibly sad, heartbreaking moment is going to happen on screen is deeply empowering. Mentally preparing a fragile heart for incoming grief before the tragic scene ever actually arrives becomes a gentle, invisible superpower. More importantly, absolute certainty remains regarding exactly when the unbearable tension will finally, peacefully resolve itself. Holding the ironclad guarantee that everything is going to be perfectly okay provides immense, healing psychological relief. Watching a gripping, entirely new drama carries an inherent, very real emotional risk to a highly fragile nervous system. Beloved fictional characters might die suddenly, leaving viewers feeling unexpectedly hollow or highly anxious right before trying to sleep. Dark, unexpected storylines might accidentally trigger personal, carefully hidden anxieties or deeply buried childhood memories. When actual waking life already feels like a high-stakes, unpredictable thriller, absolutely no one wants more suspense inside their own home. Desperately craving the boring beauty of absolute certainty is a completely natural, healthy human response to modern chaos. Familiar stories act exactly like a warm, heavy, weighted blanket wrapping tightly around a vibrating, chronically anxious body. They beautifully provide a totally safe, enclosed sandbox where big emotions are experienced without facing any actual, lasting danger. Laughing, crying, and feeling mild tension is entirely possible while remaining completely insulated by the comforting knowledge of the outcome. Furthermore, we simply cannot ignore the deep, powerful illusion of human connection constantly provided by these specific shows. Humans are profoundly social, highly emotional creatures, biologically wired to desperately need a close-knit, reliable, permanent tribe. Yet, the modern, hyper-connected digital world is ironically experiencing an unprecedented, crushing global epidemic of profound loneliness. Making genuine new friends as a busy working adult is notoriously difficult, incredibly awkward, and massively emotionally taxing. Real human relationships are wonderfully beautiful, but they are also exceptionally messy and wildly unpredictable by their very nature. Constant compromise and heavy emotional labor are continually required, always carrying the terrifying risk of sudden, painful rejection. Through highly repetitive, dedicated viewings, human brains slowly develop what developmental psychologists formally call parasocial relationships. Logically, the conscious brain absolutely knows these people are just highly paid actors reading a memorized script on a Hollywood set. Subconsciously, however, primitive emotional minds begin to process these glowing faces as actual, reliable physical friends. Distinct, comforting voices become intimately, deeply familiar to highly sensitive ears over years of repeated exposure. Fictional living rooms and brightly lit coffee shops begin to feel exactly like a warm, inviting extension of a real home. Whenever feeling incredibly lonely, deeply misunderstood, or simply overwhelmed by harsh worldly demands, these characters are always there. Fictional, pixelated friends are always waiting patiently exactly where they were last left on the digital shelf. Important dinner plans are never canceled at the absolute last minute via a cold, distant, unapologetic text message. Nobody on that screen will ever judge a viewer harshly for wearing the exact same faded sweatpants for 3 consecutive days. Core personalities never unexpectedly change, sacred trust is never betrayed, and sudden abandonment for someone cooler never happens. Returning to their fictional world feels exactly like returning to a warm, brightly lit childhood bedroom where safety is permanently guaranteed. Complete, unconditional acceptance is a remarkably rare commodity in the real world, yet it is freely available on endless streaming platforms. Profound, deeply emotional elements of psychological time travel are also intimately, heavily involved in this repetitive viewing habit. Great art is rarely just about the objective thing itself. It becomes deeply intertwined with the exact moment it was first experienced. Think back carefully right now to the very first time you ever watched your ultimate go-to comfort television show. Perhaps sitting in a cramped college dorm room, surrounded by naive optimism and endless, glowing possibilities comes immediately to mind. Maybe that specific movie was unexpectedly discovered during a terribly painful, world-shattering romantic breakup years ago. quietly serving as the only reliable floating lifeboat through an incredibly dark ocean of personal grief makes a show truly unforgettable. Pressing play today means you are absolutely not just watching the same colored pixels dance across the cold glass screen. Neurological bridges are actively, deliberately built straight back to that specific, precious era of your own unrepeatable history. Hearing those opening chords of a familiar theme song instantly transports the tired spirit back to a time when life was radically different. Things were perhaps objectively simpler back then, or maybe there was just significantly less heavy adult baggage to carry around. Privately reconnecting with an older, entirely vanished version of your own beautiful soul happens naturally during these quiet viewings. It acts as an incredibly gentle, non-judgmental way to check in with yourself, using the unchanging medium as a perfect emotional measuring stick. Characters on the screen have remained perfectly, beautifully frozen in time, completely untouched by the cruel, relentless passing years. You, however, have grown, suffered deeply, changed your mind, and evolved in 1,000 tiny, invisible ways since that first viewing. Watching these frozen figures again allows the subconscious to safely process exactly how incredibly far you have actually traveled in life. Some days, the overwhelming, suffocating weight of adult responsibility is simply too heavy to bear gracefully without a momentary, scheduled break. Wishing for a brief, temporary escape from the relentless, ticking march of time is a deeply beautiful, profoundly normal human desire. Chosen comfort shows act flawlessly as a temporary pause button on the chaotic, terrifying, unstoppable progression of the real world. Fleeting, magical spaces are graciously offered where nobody ever ages, and tragic mistakes are always neatly resolved in exactly 22 minutes. Love always triumphantly conquers all obstacles right before the familiar end credits finally begin to gracefully roll across the black screen. Therefore, the very next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling past a massive sea of brilliant, demanding new options, you must stop the guilt. Instantly punishing an exhausted mind for seeking a tiny ounce of reliable, necessary comfort serves absolutely no positive psychological purpose. Quietly silence the harsh, judgmental voice of the inner critic that whispers about wasting precious, limited time on Earth. Loud, deeply exhausting pressures of modern productivity culture should never violently invade a quiet, sacred evening sanctuary. Being lazy is absolutely not the fundamental issue here, nor is lacking any creative imagination or profound intellectual depth. Engaging in a deeply humane, biologically necessary act of profound self-soothing and vital emotional protection is what is truly happening. Brilliant, overworked minds are successfully navigating an incredibly overwhelming world by instinctively seeking out a small, familiar patch of solid ground. Honoring that profound, ancient biological need for absolute safety without any trace of lingering shame or regret is absolutely crucial. Wrap your tired soul in the incredibly comforting, warm embrace of the completely and utterly predictable narrative arc. Let those familiar, highly memorized voices wash gently over the room and quietly soothe the invisible bruises left by a difficult day. Take a very slow, deeply intentional breath and truly appreciate the absolute miracle of finding a small, reliable pocket of peace. Surviving in a chaotic universe is hard enough without constantly demanding novelty and extreme effort from an already exhausted nervous system. Before finally pressing play on that very first, heavily memorized episode just one more time tonight, pause and ask something deeply personal. Look closely at the tired, remarkably beautiful reflection of your own face in the dark television screen before the bright picture suddenly appears. Are you actually returning to this familiar story just to watch the fictional characters deliver their funny lines again? Or are you secretly, desperately returning just to briefly visit the younger, much safer version of yourself who first invited